when they found wind letters on cold mornings, they knew they weren't alone. And the flame, it didn't die. It stretched. It arched. It became one with the wind, and when the flame danced, the world watched. He was older now, but when he smiled, she saw the same wonder in his eyes as the day he set his candle ablaze. And the flame, it didn't die. It stretched. It arched. It became one with the wind. The sender was long gone, but the message still burned bright. But her most important lesson was this: the fire doesn't need to win. It just needs to be allowed. She taught them that not every flame would stay lit, but every try mattered. Every flame sparked something even in its death. Recollecting herself, Revi climbed to the top of the hill where she first lit her own night fire. With her lantern raised, she whispered, "Thank you. And if you're still with me, I have another story to tell. Click here to listen to the next story. See you soon." For the first time, Rivi realized the flame doesn't fight the wind. The flame teaches the wind to dance. She learned about the wind temples. She saw families whispering stories to the wind. She witnessed lovers lighting 2 candles, placing them side by side and watching as the wind made one flame dance and the other stand still, each teaching the other something new. Then he lit it. It flickered. It bent. It almost died. And then it held. Not just held, it leaned into the wind. The candle didn't resist. It danced. Poets sat in circles, reading aloud, letting the wind carry their words between flickers of fire. They called it the dialogue of breath and light, and it became an art form. It became softer. People didn't chase light. They curated it. They didn't fear dark. They entered it with care. The wind no longer howled with loneliness, because now it danced with fire. So people kept busy. They sang songs. They recited epics. They talked through the night. And still, the wind rattled their windows, seeped through their doors, and stole their words away. This is the story of the flame keepers and the wind. Many thousands of years ago, there were many lands. One was called Veros. But some people weren't willing to just send their pain away. They wanted to understand it. And so they wrote down the names of those they loved, placed them inside glass globes, floated those globes to the wind, and hoped they'd land in the hands of someone who understood. People laughed at first, but then they watched her do it again. She built little clay wind guards, dug flame pits. And then one night, an elder stood beside her and said, "I thought the wind ruled us," Abin replied, smiling. "Not when we listened to it." She had not fought the wind. She had learned its rhythm. And the flame had responded by dancing with it. But a girl named Avin, barefoot and stubborn, refused to accept the darkness. She spent her days collecting broken bits of pottery, carefully cleaning them, piecing them together. And at night, she snuck into the great hall where the elders met and stole the old flame scrolls, which everyone believed were just fairy tales. For weeks, she practiced behind the thick stone walls of her house, lighting twigs with flints and steel until she got blisters on her fingers. She failed, again and again and again, but she did not stop. One night, after 312 tries, her candle held. The wind screamed, but the flame stood. Just for a moment. And in that moment, everything changed. Word spread quickly through Veros. Avain had tamed the flame. Inspired by Veros, flame keepers across the world began experimenting. They didn't build walls to block wind anymore. They built wind temples. But no one knew who to credit for starting it. And so the legend of Avin was written down in the flame scrolls. Thousands of years later, on the icy peaks of Mt. Carol, where not even birds flew, a boy named Doro decided to prove what everyone already knew. And so the story of the wind and the flame continued. For centuries, people sent off little flame-filled bottles, hoping the wind would take their sorrows somewhere far away. One day, a globe landed at the feet of a woman named Revi. Avin, the girl who had shown people how to keep a flame alive in the face of the strongest winds, had traveled the world over, seeking answers in every flickering candle. But Avin was getting older, and the wisdom she sought seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand. So she returned home. Now nearing the end of her journey, Rivi returned to the place where Elric once lived, the hill where he first lit the night fire, and it was true. In cities and towns, People began writing short letters and attaching them to flame-safe paper lanterns. Revi found one such letter tied to a rock on the shore. Revi started to teach the world how to light a candle with a whisper, how to listen to the wind's rhythm, how to tell stories that can only be spoken beside fire. And so the world slowly changed. As generations passed, the world didn't become darker or lighter. Revi often wondered what had happened to Doru, the boy who had danced with the wind on the highest peak of Mount Carol. Together, they returned to the mountain. Revi carried no scrolls, no gear. Together they opened a school at the peak of the mountain, teaching the world how to live with the wind. In time, the legend of Avon faded into myth, but her lessons remained. And so it was written down in the flame scrolls. On the final page, in handwriting no one could identify, a final message appeared one day, written in ash ink. Friends, thank you so much for listening. If you liked the story, please leave a like. Every story has its ending, some with a bang, others with a whisper. But the story of the flame, the story of how humanity once lived in darkness, remembered the light, and chose to live between the two, didn't end at all. It simply glowed on. Not in pages, not in screens, but in people. And one night, when the stars finally returned in full, it was as if they looked down and said, "You've remembered who you are. But how did we get here?" Well, that's where our story begins. Many years ago, the world had forgotten the flame. For decades, everything was soft and bright. Everything was easy and loud. No stillness. No silence. Everyone plugged in, tuned out. There, a massive fire was waiting, along with those who'd already begun to remember. And it was until a small group of elders gathered in what they began calling Elderwood that things began to turn around. And that night they laughed and cried, sang and danced, told stories and prayed. They welcomed the discomfort, the uncertainty, the darkness, and in the morning they awoke changed. He was old and wrinkled like the bark of a tree, yet his eyes shone with an inner light. He said, "Tonight, we do something we haven't done in many lifetimes. Tonight, we remember who we are." He nodded toward the faces around him, faces filled with wonder and hesitancy, hope and fear. She saw tiny dots falling from the sky. At first she thought they were shooting stars. But as more and more dots rained down, she realized they were people. Hundreds of people were floating down from the sky, descending slowly toward the earth, right toward the fire. They noticed the lines on each other's faces, the light in each other's eyes. She had no idea who they were or what they wanted. But when they landed softly around the fire and turned to face her, she saw kindness in their eyes, curiosity, peace. No one knew his name. No one lit a candle for him. And so, the boy grew up hearing tales of this special night, the night when the whole world remembered the flame. They'd call him the child of the distant fire. But hundreds of miles away, a woman in a distant town lit one in his honor, as was tradition. Yes. And across the world, others followed. Oh no, it continues. She stands before a circle of new initiates in Elderwood's Hall of Flame. She says nothing for a long time, just stares into the candlelight. Then finally, she speaks. "You've been taught how to make a fire, and now learn how to knead it." She saw a future filled with light. She saw a future filled with people, and in that moment she understood. She understood that they hadn't forgotten the flame. They'd merely scattered it within themselves, and now it was coming home. A story of a hidden bloodline, a bloodline that carried the essence of the flame within their veins. She sat by the riverbank, journal in lap, and wrote her last entry. "I have watched the world forget the flame. I have watched it remember, and now I see it become part of us." They didn't call it a classroom. They called it the listening field. There each child was taught to speak once, then wait for wind. Light fire only when their hands were steady, close their eyes when hearing a story, look up at night and say, "Thank you." And for every lesson learned, they didn't earn grades. They earned embers, tiny glowing stones, warmed by shared flame. She paused, held out a match, and added, "I am not sad. I am not afraid. I am warm. I am ready." She passed that night. No grand fire, no ceremony. Thanks for watching this episode, which was made possible by a generous grant and our amazing patrons. If you'd like to help us make more videos like this, you can go to our support page. Just one single candle left to burn itself out beside her. But when people found her in the morning, the candle was still glowing, and her body had turned ever so slightly toward the rising sun. They were known as the Emberborn, those who didn't carry fire, but seemed to become it. They couldn't light candles by blinking or control flames with their hands. But when they were in a room, everyone else breathed easier. Stillness, memory. She pauses, holds out a match, and adds, "And when you're ready, you won't light it alone. You'll light it for someone." She smiled, held up a candle, and said, "Only if we forget who we are." Then she blew it out, and in the dark he could still feel her warmth. Or will you let it fade away, replaced by the cold glow of screens and the hum of machines? Because the choice, my friends, is ultimately up to us. We can choose to remember who we are. We can choose to remember the flame. They became listeners in a noisy world, holders of stories others forgot, midwives for memories, builders of safe, slow spaces. Because the truth is, it never went away. It merely waited for us to come back to it. And when we did, it welcomed us home. They lit flames not to command attention, but to invite rest. When they entered a village, people didn't crowd them. They simply left a chair by the hearth, hoping the keeper would stay the night. And as the night wore on, they shared stories, songs, traditions, laughter, dreams, choosing connection over distraction, choosing stillness over noise. A night when the world would soften the lights, hush the wires, fall silent for the hum of electronics. They left behind only footprints in the dew, traces of their presence, and a single object that none of them had brought with them. It was an obsidian mirror, was smooth and black, polished and perfect. A night when the only light came from flickering candles and crackling fires. A night when people would gather together, look up at the stars, and remember who they were. Entire villages participated. Cities went dark. Countries switched off their neon lights. And it was unusual to see massive bonfires blazing on hillsides, or hear the gentle glow of thousands of candles echoing through cathedrals. They noticed the stranger sitting on the bench across the park, the child laughing while skipping rope, the dog barking at the moon. We remember the fire, connected to themselves, to each other, to the earth, to the world. And they wanted more of this feeling. They wanted to feel whole. So that next year, on the same night, they all met again by the fire, and the year after that, and the year after that, until it became a tradition, a ritual, a celebration. They came from different countries, spoke different tongues, had different beliefs. But when they met, they understood why they were there. They knew they had forgotten something important. Something had been taken from them. Something they didn't even know they'd forgotten to remember. For the first time in generations, people began to notice the sky. They looked up and saw clouds passing overhead. They saw the sun chasing away the darkness. They saw the moon illuminating the night. They saw the stars winking at them from above. They had survived for millennia without electric light, enough to remind them of how they'd cooked their food, kept warm, told their stories, how they'd illuminated the darkness with flickering life and not machines. Slowly, over time, they started holding ceremonies, welcoming newcomers and passing on their stories, teaching them how to build a fire, how to listen in the stillness, how to remember. They called themselves the Keepers of the Flame, and it was a name that fit. And that night, they sat around the fire, sang songs almost no one knew, shared myths thought to be lost forever. So they ventured into the nearby town and knocked on doors. They stood on street corners, raised their hands, and invited everyone to follow them back to the woods for one night. They didn't know how many people would come, but they didn't need many. All they needed was one. They were lonely but also whole. In the quiet woods, they dug a pit, made a fire. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind them of how. As the days passed, more people heard about this place, about how something profound was happening in the woods, and they came. Over 20 years, they grew in number and wisdom. They were now ready for the next step. That night, under the pale glow of the nearly full moon, dozens of people left their glowing devices behind, followed the Keepers of the Flame deep into the woods. When everyone had gathered around the fire, one of the keepers spoke. Then, one by one, everyone lit a candle, then placed it inside a larger bowl filled with sand, creating hundreds of points of flickering light, casting dancing shadows on the trees. They carried the flame back to the town with them, but they noticed something else too. They noticed each other. For the first time in a very long time, people felt connected. They called it the Great Star Night, and it was a night unlike any other. One night when the stars were particularly clear, one of the keepers named Riva noticed something strange. She had no idea where they came from or why they were there. And when the sun rose, they disappeared. They simply vanished. And when Riva looked into it, she saw herself reflected back, but also the potential for what she could become, what they could all become. God. So the next night, they all lit more candles, sang louder songs, and welcomed the dawn with open arms. In the years that followed, the Great Star Night became bigger and better every year. During this time, a boy was born high in the mountains of Tarenfold, a place where no roads led and no signals reached. By dawn, a network of fire had been formed, flame passed not by hands but by memory, intention, and care. But the story of the flame doesn't end there. Fast forward several decades, Riva is now white-haired and wrapped in firekeeper robes. The initiates look confused. Riva smiles. Flame isn't about firewood, wax, or matches. It's about longing. And so the lessons continue. Over time, the role of Flamekeeper evolved. They were no longer just guardians of fire. And though some people moved on from the flame, countless others stayed, choosing the warmth of fire over the glow of screens. It was during this time that a myth began to circulate among the Flamekeepers. Some said it was myth. Others said it was proof that flame had truly entered the human bloodline. But the myth doesn't end there. One winter, Riva lit her final candle. The story of the flame didn't end with her. Oh no, it continued. Years later, a school was built beneath the open sky. It had no walls, only stone seats, fire bowls, and a circle of children. And when they graduated, they went out into the world, carrying the flame with them, lighting candles in dark places, bringing warmth to those who needed it most. It was during this time that the last story was written, the story of how a boy once asked his grandmother, "Will fire ever disappear again?" And that's the story of the flame, the story of how we remembered the flame, and how the flame lives on inside of us. So I ask you, will you remember the flame? Will you keep it burning bright? Or we can forget? It's up to you. This is the host. The age of flame had matured. It was no longer a rebellion. No longer a whisper against the glow. No. It was a way of life woven into cities, stories, rituals, and breath. The upper half, touched by the sun, blessed with fire, and the lower half, forever lost to the endless night. They say that after the Great Reckoning, the world split into two halves. The upper half, touched by the sun, blessed with fire, and the lower half forever lost to the endless night. You know the story? You've heard it before? But what you may not have heard is what happened to those who refused to choose a side. Just a single spark, tucked in a locket against her skin. Ancient, raw, waiting. It was called the Sleeping Fire, a flame that had burned long before cities, scrolls, or names. And now it was stirring again. Not in anger, not in destruction. An invitation. It wanted to be known. For 3 nights, she walked through forests untouched by flame, birdsong, mist, stillness. On the 4th night, she found it, a clearing of black stone, unlike anything she had seen. It flared when someone laughed. It cooled when someone forgave. It did not speak, but it saw. And in its gaze, the children felt something no scroll had ever prepared them for. Purpose. In its center, no trees, no sound, just a circle of ashes. And in the ashes, something pulsed beneath the soil. A place where travelers seeking guidance or rekindling could find both. It was a haven not of rules or rituals, but of remembering. He was older than Ember, his face lined with questions, because, as they say, the greatest flames burn brightest from within. "Tell me," he asked, "why do we do this? Why do we spend so much time in silence? Why do we watch a fire sleep? Why do we come here at all?" Ember smiled. The irony wasn't lost on her. So many years spent seeking answers, and now she had one that echoed in her own heart. Because she said, sometimes the greatest stories aren't in the doing, but in the becoming. Sometimes the strongest magic isn't in the spell, but in the silence. Sometimes the brightest light isn't in the flame, but in the watcher. The student looked at the fire, then back at Ember. "But doesn't the fire want to be seen?" he asked. And Ember knew he wasn't asking about the ancient flame, but about the one inside him. About the one inside all of them. She rose and walked to the edge of the clearing, arms spread wide, embracing the night. "It does," she whispered, "and we are its witness."